Hi, this is Mac from Mac's List. Before we start the show, I want to let you know about my new book, Land Your Dream Job Anywhere. I've been helping job seekers find meaningful, well-paying work since 2001, and now I put all my best advice into one easy-to-use guide. My book shows you how to make your resume stand out in a stack of applications, where you can find the hidden jobs that never get posted, and what you need to do to ace your next job interview. Get the first chapter now for free. Visit maxlist.org/anywhere. This is Find Your Dream Job, the podcast that helps you get hired, have the career you want, and make a difference in life. I'm Mac Pritchard, your host and publisher of Mac's List. I'm joined by my co-hosts, Ben Forstag and Jessica Black. This week, we're talking about how to explain what you do for a living. What do you do for a living? It's a question you probably get most days, especially when meeting new people. What you say matters a lot, says this week's guest expert, Christina Canters. Your answer may lead to your next job, or it can help you move up in your career. Christina and I talk later in the show about how you can give the best response possible. Titles for the same job often vary by company and industry. You need to understand those differences so you don't miss a job opening when looking online. Ben Forstag has found a website you can use to identify job titles across sectors. He shares it with us in a moment. Is it okay to keep consulting on the side once you've accepted a full-time job? And should you tell your new employer you're doing it? That's our question of the week. It comes from Abby Penley. She lives in Washington, D.C., and Jessica Black shares her advice in a moment. Before we talk about this week's show topic, I want to thank Jenna Forstrom for her many contributions to Find Your Dream Job. Jenna recently left the Mac's List team. I'll miss her passion for service to others, her amazing energy, and her terrific sense of humor. We all wish her well, and I'm grateful for everything she accomplished here. We're now looking for a new employee, a digital marketing strategist. See the job board on our website, maxlist.org, if you'd like to learn more. And let us know if you have a recommendation for us. Until we fill the job, Jessica Black from the Mac's List team will join us every week to answer your questions. Jessica, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mac.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you here and in the Mac's List studio. Now, let's check in with you and Ben about this week's topic. I'm curious, how do you two respond when you meet someone at an event and they say, "What do you do for a living?"
Well, I will say now, since I'm here at Mac's List, I say that I work for Mac's List, and sometimes people know what Mac's List is all about, and sometimes they don't, but I will say that I work for an online community for job seekers, which has a job board as well as other resources, including a blog and a podcast and an online course.
Good. That's a good answer. Ben, what about you?
I usually like to say something that's initially intentionally vague, something like, I help people find jobs that they love. Just because that spurs a follow-up question.
Yeah.
Well, what does that mean? What do you actually do? And I use that as a segue to talk about my work here at Mac's List. And then, I break it up a little bit more, saying I help run the business, I help run the podcast, I help develop other products and so forth.
I like the interest that you kindle when you lead with that statement. Jessica, I tend to be functional. I don't say I run a public relations company, but I will say when I'm talking about Pritchard, for example, because I run two businesses, I run a public relations company that helps nonprofits, foundations, and purpose-driven brands, and we offer communication services that help make the world a better place. And that gives a sense of our mission but our services as well.
I will say that before I worked at Mac's List, I would be a little bit more vague in terms of saying something along the lines of, I manage operations for nonprofits, something kind of more general that can encompass many different things and then talk more specifically about the functions that I would take on based on the person that I was talking to.
You know, this is an interesting topic because I've been in conversations where I ask people, like, oh, what do you do for a living? And sometimes their responses are either so vague or the tone they have is just so negative, like you don't even want to continue the conversation. You just go, okay, we'll move on to something else. I think the way you talk about what you do and also the tenor of how you talk about it is really important.
Yeah, I think Christina's going to make this point later in our conversation based on what I've read about her work, that one of the things you want to happen when you give an answer is find a way to keep the conversation going and respond in a way that both answers the question but intrigues the person, the listener, so they'll want to learn more. And once you start that process, that can lead to all sorts of doors opening, and she'll take us through how that'll work. Well, Ben, before we get Christina on the phone here, let's turn to you because you're out there every week searching the nooks and crannies of the internet. So I know you're looking always for websites, books, other tools people can use in their job search and career. Now, what have you uncovered for our listeners this week?
So this week I want to talk about a blog post I found called Why Are Job Titles Important to Your Career? And this comes from the website thebalance.com. So I'll be honest, when I started my professional career, job titles were not something I spent a whole lot of time thinking about or paid attention to. And I actually remember the very first office job I ever had. They hired me. I knew what my responsibilities were, but they hadn't put a job title on the job description. And so they came up to me and said, like, oh, what do you want your job title to be? And I was like, I don't care. It doesn't matter. And, you know, I think that was a big mistake. I was pretty naive back then. I think job titles do matter.
They matter a lot.
They matter a lot.
Yeah.
And, you know, employers use job titles to categorize positions in their organizations. And often titles are part of the compensation management system. So, you know, manager makes less than director, who makes less than officer, so forth. And when you're looking at, to find a job, you know, you can search using your current job title or the title of jobs that you're interested in as keywords. Again, these are kind of shortcuts for what level in the organization do you want to be at. So reviewing job titles is also a great way to discover what positions are available in the career fields that interest you. I know, again, this is something I've had challenges with in the past where you spend a long time in one sector where there's a certain kind of language, in the nonprofit sector, for example. And when you're trying to jump into a new employment sector, like the language is completely different, you're not even sure where to start. So this blog post is really interesting, not just for talking about the importance of job titles, but it actually has hundreds of the most common job titles across a wide array of employment sectors. They are all organized by primary and secondary categories too. So you can look up, you know, business as one of the primary categories, and that's broken up into 10 different subsets of different aspects of the business environment, and each one of those has 100 or more common job titles in the field. So this gives you like a whole lexicon, a whole dictionary of terms that you can research around. And there are little descriptions about here's what the, you know, account manager for actually does in an organization. And so if you're looking to jump into a new sector, I really strongly recommend you check this out. And this gives you a basis to start that search, because usually the very first thing you see in a job posting online is the title of the job, right? So you need to know what you're looking for.
So Ben, as you were poking around this website, did you find that many employers used very different terms to describe basically the same job?
You find a wide variety of terms, but the more you look at it, the more you see they kind of cluster around general types. The specific wording might change a little bit here and there, but most organizations are following the manager, director, officer hierarchy. And I think the other interesting thing here is within all these different fields, there's all these kind of subsets of careers that exist within the finance community that I've never heard of, but clearly because there's so many job titles clustered there, that's a ripe area for employment at this point. And so if you're interested in making that jump, like you need to know the options that are out there and the lexicon. And so this is a great resource. Again, it's Why Are Job Titles So Important to Your Career? And it's available at thebalance.com, and we will have a link in the show notes.
Well, great. Well, thank you, Ben. And I could see there'd be great value in knowing that, because I think many sectors may use different expressions or different language to talk about similar positions. And if you're changing sectors, you need to know what the language is in that industry. Well, great. Well, if you have a suggestion for Ben, we'd love to hear from you. Please write him, and we may share your idea on the show. Ben's address is easy to remember. It's ben@maxlist.org. Now let's turn to you, our listeners. Jessica Black joins us to answer one of your questions. Jessica, what is in the MaxList mailbag this week?
Great. Thanks, Mac. Today's question comes from Abby Penley, and she lives in Washington, D.C. So let's listen to what she has to say.
Hi, this is Abby from Washington, D.C., and my question is, I'm currently looking for a job. However, I have a few ongoing consulting gigs that I don't want to give up even when I do land a full-time job. Is this something that I should tell prospective employers about, or should I just not mention it?
Great question, Abby. I say absolutely tell your prospective employer that you are consulting on the side and you'd like to continue to do that. Number one, I think transparency I'm all about open and honest communication. I think that's a great skill set and quality to bring into especially a new relationship with a prospective employer. And you'd want to know right off the bat if that's something that they shy away from or maybe disapprove of, because that may mean that they aren't a good fit for you in general. But also, it's probably listed on your resume if you've been doing this for quite a while or for some time, or if you've just listed it somewhere, and the employer may ask you about that. And so bringing it up firsthand would be beneficial.
Well, I think that's great advice, Jessica. And the only thing I would add is I think that is a question of timing, because I think the best time to talk about the consulting, your interest in continuing a consulting gig, is when there's an offer on the table, because that's when you as a candidate are most attractive to an employer. And earlier in the process, employers are looking for ways to reduce the candidate pool, and you don't want to offer something that may not be an issue later in the process once you become the finalist. But I agree with you. Transparency is the way to go.
And in response to that, Mac, a way that, Abby, you could address that if it does get brought up by the employer, if earlier in the conversation than you anticipate or than you plan, a good way could be addressing that it won't affect your performance within this new job and the new full-time work hours, that you'll make sure that it stays outside of work hours and that it wouldn't affect anything.
And I think one of the ways you do that is by outlining exactly what you're talking about when you say you've got a consulting gig. Because if you just leave it open-ended, the employer might think, I don't know what that means. I mean, they're working 20 extra hours when they're not here. But you could say something like, this is the kind of thing I do on Saturday afternoons to make a little extra money, and it's a passion project for me. It's not going to be something I do in the office, and it's certainly this job comes first in terms of if there was a time crunch. So you just need to be open and explicit and honest.
Absolutely.
Well, great. Well, excellent advice, Jessica. Thank you. If you've got a question for Jessica, please send her an email. Our address is jessica@maxlist.org. Or even better, call our listener line. That number is area code 716-JOB-TALK. That's area code 716-562-8255. If we use your question on the show, we'll send you a copy of Land Your Dream Job Anywhere. We'll be back in a moment, and when we return, I'll talk with this week's special guest, Christina Canters, about how to explain what you do for a living. Most people struggle with job hunting. The reason is simple. Most of us learn the nuts and bolts of looking for work by trial and error. That's why I produce this podcast, to help you master the skills you need to find a great job. It's also why I wrote my new book, Land Your Dream Job Anywhere. For 15 years at MaxList, I've helped people in Portland, Oregon find meaningful, well-paying, and rewarding jobs that they love. Now I put all of my job hunting secrets in one book that can help you no matter where you live. You'll learn how to get clear about your career goals, find hidden jobs that never get posted, and ace your next job interview. For more information and to download the first chapter for free, visit maxlist.org/anywhere. Now let's turn to this week's guest expert, Christina Canters. Christina Canters is a communication skills speaker, coach, and she's the host of the podcast Stand Out, Get Noticed. She helps ambitious professionals become more effective and confident when they speak, present, and pitch. An engaging speaker, Christina has wowed audiences at organizations and conferences around the world with her passion, humor, and the occasional ukulele song. She joins us today from Melbourne, Australia. Christina, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks so much, Mac. I'm excited.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. And one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show is to talk about this week's topic. What do you do for a living? Now, you wrote a blog post on this, but it had, I think, a more effective title. You want to share that with our listeners?
Yes, I called it How to Suck Less at Explaining What You Do.
And I think that is something that our listeners would have a lot of interest in. Now, how do people typically respond when they're asked that question, what do you do for a living, and what happens?
Well, most people start conversations with this question because that's sort of the default question that they know to ask. And I think I prefer not to start conversations with that question, but a lot of people do. So it pays to be able to answer that question well. And a lot of people don't actually give much consideration to how they answer that question. And they usually answer with their job title. So they'll say, oh, I'm a dentist, or I'm a project manager, or I'm a graphic designer. And then they stop. And then they wait expectantly for the other person to follow up with some amazing, intelligent question and for the conversation to flow. But in reality, it doesn't work that way, because when you give just your title, it doesn't give the other person something to grab onto to actually continue the conversation. And I think the first thing for listeners to realize is that when someone asks you, what do you do, or what do you do for a living, a lot of the time they don't actually care or really want to know. It's more so that that's the only way they know how to start a conversation. So think about it as your answer should help to continue with that conversation rather than just give your job title. Does that answer the question?
It does. And so I can imagine people thinking, okay, that sounds like terrific advice. What are strategies I could use to give an answer that that's going to engage people and keep the conversation going and avoid those awkward silences or blank stares?
Oh yes, those awkward silences. I'll tell you this: if you answer the question, "What do you do?" with your title, and all you get is a stare or them going, "Oh, okay," then you haven't made an impact. Or even worse, if they say, "Oh, that's interesting," it's not interesting. They just don't know what to say. So I'm afraid you're going to have to give them something more, okay? Think about it as you're helping them to carry on the conversation. So what you can do to add on to your job title is you can do a few things. You could add on a sentence about who you help and how you help them. So, for example, if you're a graphic designer, you could say, I'm a graphic designer. I help small business owners to communicate the story of their brands much more effectively. And then they'll go, oh, okay. And what you're doing here is you're actually feeding them bits of information that they can grab onto. So if they could potentially be a small business owner, so they could go, oh, hey, I could really use your help with that. Or they might know someone who's a small business owner who could use your help, right? You could also add on a fact. For example, I'm a physiotherapist. Actually, did you know that most back injuries occur during Christmas time when people are trying to put up their Christmas tree? That's not an actual fact. I just made that up. But
sounds plausible.
Of course. But then the other person's going to go, no way. Hey, I had an uncle that hurt himself or whatever. And that's a way that you can actually help the other person to continue on that conversation. So those are some things that you can do.
Okay, so add a sentence that explains the benefit of the service you offer or who you might serve, or second, throw a fun fact in there but whatever the approach, it's about keeping the conversation going and getting a reaction from your listener.
Yes, because you might mention, let's say you're explaining who you're serving and how you help them. The more you share in that one sentence, the more that they have to grab onto to continue on a conversation. So you might share who you're helping. They could potentially grab onto that and go, oh, I know someone who is that person. You share, what you actually do to help them. That might resonate with them as well. Or even the place where you're working or whatever it is, that's going to allow them to continue the conversation with you.
Now, Christina, many of our listeners are either actively looking for a job or maybe thinking about making a move to a new position. Should they take a different approach? Should job seekers answer this question differently, especially if they're unemployed?
Well, it depends on what you want. So if you are unemployed and if you are looking for a job, by all means, use this as an opportunity to share what you're looking for. And because you never know, the person you're speaking to might be able to help you with that job search, or they might know someone who can help you with that job search. So there is a bit of a mindset shift that needs to happen here. And I know a lot of people who might be unemployed or not happy in their work, you may not want to talk about that. You may not want to say, oh, I'm unemployed, because it might sound bad to you. Or you don't want to say, oh, I'm hating my job. Or you just don't want to talk about your job, right? But instead, if you shift your mindset to think that this is a great opportunity to share what I want and this person might be able to help me, then that's going to put a positive spin on it and actually help you to do this and make you more likely to get out there and be open to talking to people. So what you can do, if someone asks you, oh, so what do? You could say, oh, I'm actually looking for new job opportunities at the moment. I'd like to focus on helping XYZ with XYZ. So again, like I shared earlier, you can share who you would like to help and how you would like to help them, and share your area of expertise, right? And one thing that I've noticed a lot of people do when they're looking for jobs is that they tend to phrase their, elevator pitch on what a company can help them do, right? So they'll say, I'm looking for a company that can do this for me, a company that can provide me with this sort of role or this sort of opportunity, or where I can grow and learn, blah, blah, blah. I would suggest that you actually flip it and share what sort of company you would like to help and what you can do for them, okay? Because let's say that you're speaking to someone who could potentially help you, right? They're going to be thinking, what's in it for me? Okay. So if you're going to say to them, oh, hi, this is my area of expertise and I would love to work for a small company that specializes in this sort of work because I could really contribute XYZ. They're going to be thinking, oh, okay, maybe I could use their help, or maybe I know someone who could use their help. Instead of making it all about you and saying, I want this and I'm looking for a company that does this and this and this for me. Okay, so it's a different way of phrasing it. But if you're worried about saying, you don't have to say that you're unemployed. You can say, I'm doing this at the moment, but I'm looking for new opportunities in this particular area.
Now, Christina, I've seen you write about this, about the importance of confidence and what a big part it plays in when you're talking to others about the work you do. Why do people need to be confident when they explain what they do for a living?
Oh, it's so important. If you don't come across as being confident in yourself, then how can you expect other people to be confident in you? So if you're looking for a job, and you're standing there and your shoulders are hunched over and you're looking at the floor and you're like, yeah, well, I'm kind of good at design and I'm sort of looking for a role that, in a company that might want to take me on. If that person's standing there and going, well, this person doesn't sound very confident in themselves. Can I trust them to do a good job? Are they someone that I want to recommend? So it's absolutely key to being able to get people on board with you and your ideas and want to recommend you to someone who could potentially help you. So confidence is very, very important.
What are some of your best tips for projecting confidence, especially without risking sounding arrogant?
That's a great question. I get this a lot. People write to me and say, I'm afraid of sounding arrogant. Firstly, if you're one of those people who's afraid of sounding arrogant, the fact that you are aware of that means that you most likely will not sound arrogant. It's the people who are completely oblivious and are like, oh, I'm not arrogant. They're the ones who come across as arrogant. So don't worry. Okay. Don't worry about that. One thing you can do is to really get yourself into a positive physical state before you even get to that event or before you even, arrive at that event or you're talking to someone. Okay. I do the same thing before an important presentation. I'll dance around the room. I'll put on a happy song. I'll put my shoulders back, my head up, and I'll just get physically really pumped up. And then by the time I get on the stage, right, I'm already in this really positive physical state. And Tony Robbins talks about this all the time. If you want to change your emotional state and have success in your life, the first thing you got to do is change your physical state. So, power posing, all that stuff. If you haven't heard of power posing, research it. There's a lot of information out there on it. The second thing you can do is to watch your language. Now, a lot of people, I find when you ask them what they do, or they are explaining what they do, they'll say, I'm just right? I've heard people say, I'm just a personal assistant, or I'm just a hairdresser, or I'm just an admin assistant. And a lot of these people I speak to actually really enjoy their jobs, yet they talk themselves down as if this particular role is not worthy or it's not good enough. So if you find yourself saying, I'm just a student, or whatever it is, I've only been working for a couple of years, I'm just a graduate, I want you to delete that word from your vocabulary. Now, all you got to do is pause when you feel that word coming up. So instead of saying, I'm just go, I'm right? It doesn't make it makes a huge difference to how you come across when you say, I'm a graduate, right? I'm an executive assistant. I'm a hairdresser and I love it, right? There's nothing wrong with saying, I'm proud of my job, I love my job, and this is what I am. If you're looking to move on, if you're not happy in your position, you can say, well, right now I'm a blah, 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 but I'm hoping to transition to a new position. In fact, and then that's where you can go into your pitch, so to speak, about what you're looking for and who you want to be helping. Okay, so really watch your language, because it does have an impact on your inner confidence as well as the confidence that you project.
So ban the word just and substitute a pause instead, and speak with excitement and confidence about what it is you're doing.
Absolutely. If you want people to be interested in what you're saying, you've got to be interested in what you're saying,
Agreed. Now, Christina, I know we have listeners out there who have highly technical jobs. And do you have a recommended formula for them for describing that position to others?
Ooh, so eliminating jargon. I love this. I have a friend who, I remember I once asked him, so what do you do? And he said, I work at a bank. And I was like, that doesn't help me. What do you do at the bank? And he goes, I'm a quantitative analyst. And I'm like, I still have no idea what that means. It was just so confusing. And I said, how would you explain this to a 10-year-old? And he thought for a moment and he said, well, you know how when you go to the bank to get a loan, like a home loan? I said, yeah. He said, well, when you do that, all your data goes into a system. He said, I work on the mathematical algorithm behind that system that determines whether you get the loan or not. And I was like, okay, I get it now. And what I loved about that explanation was that he put it into terms that I could understand, right? I'm not a quantitative analytical person. I do not know bank jargon. I don't know any of that jargon. And I loved how in that way that he explained it. So from this, I came up with a formula, you could call it, for explaining technical jobs. And to do this, first of all, you ask a question, but you make it related to an everyday thing that everyone knows. So you might say, do you know when this happens? So you would fill in this, with whatever it is. So when you see X, Y, Z, and then you wait for them to nod. So like my friend did, he said, so when you go to a bank to get a home loan? I say, yes, I do. You have to wait for that yes. Okay. If someone says, no, and you got to simplify it again. Then you got to go, okay, so when you want to buy a house and you need money, and then they'll say, yes. Then you go, well, you need a loan for that, right? So you get what I mean.
Yeah,
so you have to keep simplifying it until you get a nod and an agreement. Because if you don't and you continue on, you've lost them already. So you get a nod, then you say, well, I do the XYZ behind the XYZ that does XYZ, right? So you're filling in all these blanks. So you have to ask a question first that relates to a real world experience or example that anyone could understand. When you get the nod and the yes, then you say, well, I do the whatever, and then you go on to explain it. You could potentially ask another question as well, depending on how complex your job is, right? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And what I love about that is you're listening and you're engaging the other person and you're getting feedback. And so you're not talking at them; it's a conversation, and it's your answer is going to lead somewhere. Well, absolutely. Yeah. Well, Christina, this has been very enjoyable chatting with you. Now tell us what is next for you. What's coming up next for Christina Canters?
I do have a few conferences that I'm speaking at coming up, which is something I'm really excited about. I've got a big real estate conference. I'll be speaking to 400 real estate agents here in Melbourne on how to build their own confidence and communicate better with clients. I'll be emceeing a large women in tech conference as well in March coming up. So I am excited about that. And I'm coming over to the States in August for Podcast Movement, which I can't wait for.
Yeah. And in fact, my co-host Ben Forstag and I will be there. So I hope we have a chance to connect in person.
Alrighty. I look forward to it.
Good. I do too. And for our listeners who want to learn more, I know they can visit your website, which is the C Method. That's C for Christina, thecmethod.com. And we'll include links to your website and other resources that you mentioned in our show notes. Christina, thanks for coming on the show today.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mac.
You're welcome. Take care. All right, we're back in the Maxlist studio with Jessica and Ben. Now, what are your reactions to my conversation with Christina? I actually, that was a lot of fun for me, actually.
It was a lot of fun. She had great energy. And that was one of the things that I took from her conversation with you was, number one, her emphasis on making your statements relatable and just starting a conversation and making it enjoyable for the other person as well to just continue a conversation. But then also to project confidence and also, the energy and excitement that you project comes back to you and just keeps the conversation going really easily and makes it more fun for everyone. And I think that those are both great points. And to watch your saying just and only and diminutive words.
Yeah, I loved her point about just. I think I certainly do this, and I see it in others. When we add those hedging words, sometimes I think it's inspired by well-intentioned modesty, but we don't have to do that, and we can take pride in what we do and our accomplishments.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Ben, what are your thoughts?
I really liked her point about describing highly technical positions. And I don't think I have a very technical job, but I certainly know that this technique will come in handy when I try to explain to my mother for the 100th time what I do for a living.
Yeah, to me, that's the acid test when you're at a family gathering. Does your aunt or uncle really understand what you do?
What do you tell your mother now when she asks you what you do?
Usually I just tell her I help run a Portland-based job board and an online community for people looking for work. And she nods and smiles. And then we go and talk about the weather.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think you might do differently, Ben? The next time you and your mom are talking about how you're spending your days.
You know how you can go online and look for jobs?
Exactly.
I help run a website that does that.
I facilitate that job posting.
Yeah, good. Well, it's a good formula, and I think it'll be useful to our listeners, certainly, and at the next Forstag family gathering. Well, terrific. Well, thank you both, and thank you, Christina, for joining us this week, and thank you, our listeners, for downloading this week's episode of Find Your Dream Job. If you like what you hear, please sign up for our free weekly newsletter. In every issue, we give you the key points of that week's show. We also include links to all the resources mentioned, and you get a transcript of the full episode. If you subscribe to the newsletter now, we'll send you our job seeker checklist. In one easy-to-use file, we show you all the steps you need to take to find a great job. Get your free newsletter and checklist today. Go to maxlist.org/podcast. And join us next Wednesday when our special guest will be Nancy Colomer. She'll explain how to go about choosing a second act career. Until next time, thanks for letting us help you find your dream job.